Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Polar Bears International webcast celebrating Arctic Sea Ice Day. Today, we're going to talk about talking about it. How do we talk about climate change with our friends and family and colleagues in a way that makes us feel comfortable, makes them feel comfortable, and makes real change happen? Thank you so much for joining us today. Arctic Sea Ice Day is tomorrow, but we thought this would be a great primer to tomorrow when we launch the Beluga Cam. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But first, we want to introduce our amazing panel today. I'm Elisa. I live in Whitehorse up in the Yukon in Canada, and I'm the Director of Conservation Outreach and one of the staff scientists at Polar Bears International. I'm so happy to be with you today, as well as my lovely colleagues. I'll throw it over to Marisa.
Hi, everyone. I'm Marisa Kraus, and I'm tuning in live from my home office in Columbus, Ohio, and I am the Director of Conservation Programs here at Polar Bears International.
Awesome. And Kayla.
And I'm Kayla McCurry. I'm calling in from Portland, Oregon, and I'm the outreach specialist for Polar Bears International. So happy to be here today.
Fabulous. So we have a cool little kind of geographic triangle here going on. And again, if you're just tuning in, we are celebrating Arctic Sea Ice Day, which is tomorrow on July 15th. This is an opportunity for us in the middle of summer to just celebrate this incredible Arctic sea ice ecosystem that polar bears depend on, that beluga whales depend on, and that people in the north and around the world depend on. Arctic sea ice is more than just frozen ocean. It really forms the base of the food chain in the Arctic. It's such a special place, and we love to call attention to it. Now, tomorrow we will be launching the underwater and above water beluga cams live from Churchill, Manitoba. But today we're going to talk about talking about it. So how do we talk about climate change? And to get into that first, we better give you some context. And so we're going to queue up a short video to kick us off that's going to tell you a little bit about why Arctic sea ice is so important and how it's tied to so much life in the Arctic.
Future generations of people and polar bears depend on the decisions and plans that we make today. A polar bear's life cycle is almost exclusively tied to the sea ice. Because polar bears rely on sea ice to hunt, to breed, and sometimes to den, sea ice loss from climate change is their biggest threat, and the reason the bears are listed as vulnerable on the IUCN's Red List of Threatened Species. What we learn about climate change impacts on polar bears in Hudson Bay can be applied across the Arctic to help conserve other populations. Climate change is already affecting some populations of polar bears. Since we get most of our energy from fossil fuels, we are producing huge amounts of carbon dioxide. You see, regular amounts of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere act like a blanket around the Earth, trapping heat and keeping our planet at a stable temperature. However, when we burn fossil fuels like coal, oil, and natural gas for energy, we pump rampant amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. This buildup thickens the blanket, trapping too much heat, disrupting the climate, and melting Arctic sea ice. When Arctic waters are cold enough, the top layer freezes into a special type of ice called sea ice. Sea ice is to the ocean what soil is to a forest. It supports the entire Arctic food chain. Food from this marine ecosystem also sustains northern communities. The key to getting the climate back to functioning the way it should, and to preserving a future for polar bears across the Arctic, is to move away from using fossil fuels for energy altogether. The most important thing we can do is vote with the climate in mind to let our leaders know we support a swift transition to renewable energy sources. In the meantime, we can directly participate in and learn more about our local and regional renewable energy options. We can all make a difference outside our own households by influencing where our energy comes from, because together we can make sure that polar bears roam the Arctic sea ice for generations to come.
Polar bears are so well adapted to a life on Arctic sea ice. They cannot live on land. from their big sticky claws with their sharp curved claws, or their sticky paws with their sharp claws, their digestive system, their long, beautiful neck that helps them swim and get in and out of seal holes, their fur that's got 2 layers, it's so thick and it's colorless, so it blends in with the snow around them, to their thick layer of body fat. They are a bear that is adapted to live in the Arctic on the ice, and to use that ice to get their main prey, seals. Polar bears need a diet of seal blubber to be healthy and to live across the Arctic, and they can only get that blubber with sea ice. They're not the only animal that depends on Arctic sea ice. Of course, belugas do too. That's why you see Polar Bears International celebrating the beluga cam. Beluga whales depend on Arctic sea ice for protection from their orca predators, and also just depend on sea ice the same way polar bears do as part of that food ecosystem. It's so critical that we do keep it in the Arctic. But the good news is we know the solutions to keep Arctic sea ice in the Arctic. We know how to do it. And so I'll pass it over to Marisa to kind of talk about what we know, what we can do.
Thanks, Elisa. So you heard Elisa recap how polar bears are perfectly suited for a life upon the frozen ocean. And it's important that we protect that habitat for polar bears in future generations, but also for the other species that depend upon sea ice across the circumpolar north. And you may have heard it mentioned in the video as well that the key to saving sea ice and getting our climate back to functioning the way it should is ultimately to transition away from using fossil fuels for energy, the energy of the past, and moving towards more sources of energy that come from nature, like the wind, sun, and water. But so ultimately, we need to rethink and reduce our energy use. And so when you hear us talk about our solutions suite at Polar Bears International, you'll hear us talk about the top actions that ultimately fall into 3 buckets. And those 3 buckets are an energy shift, so shifting away from fossil fuels for energy to more renewable energy sources. But in the meantime, we can also use much, much less of those types of energies that add heat trapping gases to our atmosphere and burn fossil fuels for energy. So that's what we refer to as energy efficiency. And energy efficiency programs could be encouraging construction standards and including better heating and cooling systems, or insulation or lighting systems. But we want to scale that up, thinking about outside of our own households. So including these energy efficiency programs and these energy shifts in the places that we all work, in the places that we play or that we school and learn, right? So we want to scale it up to more community level solutions to sort of scale the impact of the problem. The last bucket within the solution suite is what we call talk about it. And, the research tells us that the majority of Americans are concerned about climate change, but perhaps self-silencing because they don't feel like they have the tools to confidently talk about it. And so we're going to get into a little exercise here, and Elisa's going to set us up. We're going to do some role play, and these are, everyday scenarios in which you might find yourselves sharing your concern for climate change and its impacts, either on people or polar bears or your local ecosystem where you live. And so, Elisa, I'm going to pass it to you while we prepare for our role play.
Thanks, Marisa. So this is kind of fun, and we hope this will be a helpful tool for folks who maybe are a little intimidated by starting these conversations. And hey, we totally get it. It can feel pretty awkward when you're at the family barbecue bringing up climate change, not knowing how people will react. But it's important to remember how far we've already come. I think most of us right now have seen that things are happening around us. There's some pretty extreme weather going on, and this might be a really good jumping off point for folks. And conversations shape societies. We can already talk about things today that we couldn't talk about a couple decades ago, unrelated to climate change even. But as we talk about things and they become more normalized, we can shift how we want them to be. We have the power with our words to shape our future in a way that protects us and polar bears. So let's just dive into an example. We've got 3 examples for you. I'm going to set the scene for our first role play. Okay, Marisa and Kayla, they are friends meeting for a coffee. We've all done that before. And they're discussing the recent smoke in the air and the extreme weather events. Very relatable. Take it away.
Thanks, Elisa. Okay, here we go. Oh, Kayla, so great to see you again. Thank you for rescheduling. I had to pick up my kiddo from summer camp. They had to cancel because of all this smoke, that climate change.
Oof, man, I keep hearing about climate change, but I mean, what about last winter? Seriously, it was so cold and snowy here. I think we had almost like a record snowfall in that one big storm.
You know, it's interesting that you bring up that record snowfall, Kayla. The experts tell us that extreme weather is really something we can expect as our climate changes and expect it to happen more frequently. You know, in some places like the Arctic, that looks like warmer temperatures, but in other places, maybe stronger, more frequent storms. And and like these wildfires, and then here in Ohio, the residual smoke as a result of that.
Yeah, the smoke has been so intense, but I guess it sort of seems impossible that both of those things could be true at the same time. How could we it be colder and we have these historically bad fires?
Well, you see, Kayla, the ocean actually regulates the climate system the way your heart regulates the flow of blood throughout your body. It's super interesting. And as the heart of the climate circulatory system, the ocean maintains the Earth's temperatures. And it does this by moving heat and moisture via currents and winds, and actually stabilizes the Earth's temperature by absorbing heat and then transferring it across the globe. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess so. It's a little hard to wrap my brain around all of that.
I got you, girl. So when we burn fossil fuels for coal, oil, and or when we burn fossil fuels like coal, oil, and natural gas for energy for things like heating and cooling our homes or transporting goods from one place to the next, our carbon dioxide emissions actually trap extra heat in our atmosphere around our planet. And that heat puts stress on our ocean, which damages its ability to keep the climate stable. And as a result of this stress, you know, sometimes the ocean pumps too much heat and moisture throughout the system, sometimes too little. And, you know, that can result in intense winter storms. Other times it looks like heat domes that we're hearing about. Those are the weather conditions that prime the landscape for dramatic and explosive wildfire events like we're seeing, and ones that actually burn hotter and longer than we've experienced before. So, really, climate disruption affects all ecosystems and communities and can put all of us at risk. And so, I think that if we think about the ocean as the heart of the climate, we can see that we need to prevent further damage to it, you know?
Yeah, I really hadn't thought of it that way. It sounds a little overwhelming. It just makes me wonder if there's anything we can do about something that feels so big.
Right, right. I get that. You know, we really need to rethink our society's reliance on fossil fuels for energy. But it's not just us, though. Communities and schools around the country have been asking their leaders for better energy solutions. And thousands of schools have actually been installing solar panels, which is super cool because that provides not only clean energy, but it's also cost savings for the schools and communities. And interestingly, new learning opportunities for the students.
Our school had solar panels installed last year. I remember how excited everyone was. It is wild to think that something like that could really make a difference.
Oh, no way, Kayla. That's cool. My kids' school did the same thing. And I was actually reading that a number of schools have been working to increase solar, you know, in their communities, something by like 80% in the past few years, which is kind of unbelievable. You never hear people talk about that. And many of those projects happen due to the strong support and the active voices from both those students and the teachers and administrators at the school. So I think really that just by talking to our colleagues and our families and our students about how action is possible, you know, sort of fuels more action, um, and is a really good way to tackle the source of the problem.
Thank you.
And seen. Thanks, ladies. So that was a really, really nice example of a climate conversation. So I'll let these two get set up here for a second. So a few things to notice about these conversations. First of all, they do not need to be perfect like they are. It's no conversations we have is perfect. What's important is that we're starting with something that's a shared value with somebody else. So we can bond over something. These two both were, you know, talking about their kids' schools. We can find some commonality with anybody really, and then from there using a reasonable tone and just asking about concerns. And we really don't need all the facts. The important thing is that we all want a cleaner, better future for ourselves and for polar bears, but really it's, it's about changing our energy systems for the good of the entire planet. Okay, I think we're ready. I see them setting up for the second scene. Okay, so this next scene, oh, and I should say too, please do send your questions in. We have one from Nicole that we'll get to shortly. So thank you so much for sending in your question. If anyone else has questions, feel free to put them in the chat. This next scene, this is about how we can hear people say, well, this global warming is just part of a natural cycle. I think we've heard folks say that before. It's just normal, nothing to worry about. So how can we talk about our concerns when that is where somebody is coming from? So in this scene, Marisa and Kayla, they are family members at a barbecue in the summer, which I think we've also all been at. So I'll let them take it away.
Hey, Marisa, long time no see. My mom said that you just finished a big patio project. Any other upcoming projects on that house?
Yeah, just in time. Who would have thought that we would have a torrential downpour on the 4th of July? Next up is probably windows for me.
Seriously, especially here. I don't remember that ever happening before. Climate change, am I right?
Okay, I'm gonna stop you right there because I know you care a lot about this, but the Earth goes through periods of warming and cooling, and it's really just a part of the natural cycle. I mean, we aren't in an ice age anymore. Of course, it's warmer.
As you mentioned, the climate is changing. One thing that's important to remember is the rate of change that we're seeing and how unprecedented it is. This rain on the 4th, climate reacts to whatever forces are, changing it at the time. And right now, humans are the dominant force.
But how can we really know that?
It's interesting you asked that. So the atmosphere is like a blanket that surrounds the Earth. When we burn fossil fuels like coal, oil, and methane gas for energy, we add more and more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. This buildup thickens this blanket effect, trapping in more heat around the Earth, which raises our average global temperature and disrupts the climate.
Okay, but it seems like the conversation is always ice and polar bears. And honestly, there's just so many other things that are of a concern to me right now. And that just seems so far away and not really a big deal.
Sure, it can feel far away, but we're seeing the impacts right now. And the things that we can do today that lots of people are already doing, they have a big impact. You have that big window project coming up. Did you know that you can get a home energy efficiency test? It lets you know where you're losing energy. And that's money out of your wallet. Replacing your windows with energy efficient ones and identifying places where we can better conserve energy in our homes means immediate cost savings and may even help those polar bears.
Okay, I'm getting there, but is it really our fault here in North America? It seems like other parts of the world are way further behind.
We have certainly done our part to contribute to the problem. You can see trends and temperature changes coinciding with our own industrial revolution. Our habits drive immense amount of fossil fuel usage across the globe. The key here is that we can be leaders and be responsible with our natural resources by taking practical and common sense steps right now. Be the change, cousin.
Awesome. Thank you for the little family barbecue scene. So a couple good ideas of how to combat some of these common things we might hear. We really are seeing unprecedented rates of change. And it's not only about the polar bears, it's about things that are going on in all of our own backyards. But for this next role play, we will look a little bit more at polar bears. So this next one, we're going to kind of talk about the idea of what's wrong with a little warmer weather. And that's something I hear a lot. I live in Northern Canada, and I'll tell you, in December, when it's pretty cold, there's folks around me that say, man, it would sure be nice to have a little warmer weather. And hey, understandable, but actually it's a pretty big deal when we're disrupting our Earth ecosystems like that. So how can we kind of come at that idea? This next stage, and I'll give these gals a second to set up. So this next, I'm going to set the stage for you. So Maurice and Kayla, so one of them is a Polar Bears International supporter. So they're maybe a Polar Bear patron. They're in our monthly giving group. They've maybe been to PBI House in Churchill. They visited our amazing interpretive center at the Polar Bears International House. And they just watched Disney's Polar Bear movie, which is a lovely movie. So this gal really likes her polar bears. She's pretty concerned. And she's talking to her friend. And okay, I think they're ready. Here we go.
Marisa, oh, good to see you and baby. I was thinking about you. Did you see that article that the Arctic is warming 4 times faster than the rest of the planet, and some places like Svalbard almost 7 times faster? That's wild to me.
You know, honestly, a few extra warm days or a few freezing days, you know, they don't sound all that bad to me. By the end of the winter, stuck in the house with this one, you know, honestly, I'm over it.
Well, in the moment, it may feel like just a couple of degrees. Let's put it in perspective. Remember, we just watched that show on polar bear cubs.
Oh, so cute. They were so tiny. I can't believe they can live in such frigid conditions.
And such incredible moms like you. I think it said that polar bear moms need to bulk up on plenty of blubber-rich seals to retain enough energy to feed their cubs in the den. While in the den, the mothers don't eat or drink. Instead, they live off their body fat. The mother's milk is rich and significant contributor to the rapid growth of cubs. But that's a significant cost to the mom.
Totally. As a mother, this is incredibly relatable.
Right? We have pantries, refrigerators, gardens to choose from to fuel our bodies and kiddos.
Yeah, and let's be serious, DoorDash.
Oh, definitely. I'll bet polar bear moms would love DoorDash. Anyway, what were we talking about? All right. Arctic is warming 4 times as fast as the rest of the planet, causing sea ice to melt. In several regions around the Arctic, this is reducing the amount of time polar bears have to hunt seals, increasing their fasting periods and forcing them to rely on their fat stores for longer periods of time. Already in parts of the Arctic, longer ice-free seasons and longer fasting periods have led to a decline in some polar bear populations.
Look at you, Kayla, always on topic. How is this not part of my plan to enjoy a few warmer days?
To save sea ice, polar bear moms, and our own future, we need to move away from burning fossil fuels for energy. Okay, so someone explained it to me like this. Let me see if I got it right. Plants grow by using the regular carbon dioxide that animals exhale. So some CO2 is part of the normal life process. But we're also adding carbon dioxide to the atmosphere when we burn coal, oil, and methane gas for energy. We call this rampant CO2 because there's too much of it and it's getting out of control. Rampant levels of CO2 build up in the atmosphere and ocean, where it causes problems for the Earth's climate and ecosystems, resulting in shorter periods of sea ice for polar bear moms to hunt and build those fat reserves.
Well, that actually does make a lot of sense to me. It seems like just a few degrees or warmer days for me is really not what polar bears and people are seeing in other parts of the world.
Totally. The good news is that we have the power to change this. If we all join together and keep talking about it, we can do the collective work of creating a better world for all of us, people and polar bear families. Thanks, Marisa, for these, and thank you everyone for listening to our role play skits on a few of these topics surrounding climate change and how we could have them in our everyday lives. I'd love to talk now just briefly about some of these elements that we use when we're talking about climate change and some tips that we have for you and goals for these climate conversations. There are a million reasons why climate change matters, but not all will move people to act, and some will actually turn them off. As Marisa mentioned, research tells us that majority of Americans are concerned about climate change, but they're self-silencing because they're convinced they have the minority opinion. They're also nervous about talking about it because they're not sure if they can talk about it correctly. But rest assured, you don't have to be a climate scientist or have a rebuttal to any anticipated pushback to talk about it in a meaningful way. It is, though, a way we can all get involved, and we have a few tips to help you get started. Things to think about when having these conversations with your friends, family, or your community. You may have heard some of these in our role play exercise a moment ago. 1, connect with them. By doing this, we help to answer the question of why does it matter? Rather than bombarding people with facts and data or applying fear and shame, focus on things that you share. Beginning with shared values offers natural openings for talking about climate change. Try grounding these conversations in what connects you to the other person, whether it's local sports, an extreme weather event near you, national security, or children and grandchildren. Then connect the dots between what you both care about and a changing climate. Show respect for the other person's experiences by actively listening in the conversation and maintaining a reasonable tone. Ask questions and talk about their concerns. This will help you have a more honest and open dialogue. We have to remember this conversation is for everyone, not just those that already agree with us. Also, we're going to answer the question, how does it work? And that can be a really valuable way to help people understand the mechanisms of climate change. You heard us using metaphors like the heat trapping blanket, regular rampant CO2, ocean is the climate's heart. However, if you're feeling unsure of the details, you don't have to pretend to have all of the answers. The point is simply to talk about the issue, sharing concerns and what you've learned instead of just avoiding them. This helps to really highlight the impacts we're already seeing around us. We often try to correct people's mistakes by exposing their wrong thinking and debating like me versus you or dumping lots of facts on them. But we need to remember that it isn't about trying to win an argument. These strategies just don't work the way we think that they should. In fact, research has shown that using these approaches just makes people hold on even tighter to their current convictions. This is called confirmation bias, and it means we're all more likely to look for and cling to information that aligns with our current worldview and what we already believe to be true. It's just easier for our brains to process. So you won't change people's minds or get people who are on the fence about climate change to adopt a different lifestyle to address climate change just by throwing facts at them. So let's not. Let's connect with them where they are and find some common ground and remember what's at stake. Lastly, how do we improve the situation? Let's keep talking about it. Challenges around climate can bring up a lot of difficult feelings, and often this leads folks to a sense of overwhelm. But pairing this experience with information about tangible solutions can motivate meaningful action. This work is collective, and by talking about it, we can continue to find examples of opportunities where people are coming together already. Concern for the climate is normal. If we can empower the majority of people who are already concerned about climate change to start talking with their friends and families, we can turn the tide on this misconception and really start mobilizing for change. We hope these tips are helpful for you. They're rooted in the work of our friends and partners, the National Network of Ocean and Climate Change Interpretation, and our work here at Polar Bears International. We know it can feel like you're alone when you're thinking about this, but you're not. Solutions and climate actions are happening all around us. One of our favorites is, of course, talking about it. Something you're already doing, something that can inspire hope for all of us and a brighter future for people and polar bears.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Kayla. Very well said. It's just about having conversations. They don't need to be perfect. They don't need to turn into arguments, but the decisions and conversations we have today can really set up the future for polar bears, for people, and for everything in between. So we do want to get to the question that came in, and you have a few more minutes to throw in a question in the chat if there are any. So Nicole, thank you so much. The question is, what is the consensus on electric cars? I've heard a lot of people say that they're the way to help climate change, but some say that the batteries lead to more pollution. I'm interested in learning more, but don't know how to find a non-biased source on either side. So Marisa, maybe I'll throw this one to you to talk a bit about electric cars.
Yeah, so thanks for asking. I think the important thing to remember is that when we're talking about climate change and the root of the problem, we're talking about the burning of fossil fuels for energy. So that's coal, oil, and natural gas, and some of those, the traditional fuel that you're burning in your cars. And so one of the most important things that we can do is to vote for civic leaders in our areas that are making these types of technologies cleaner and affordable and more accessible and available to all. And so really telling those civic leaders that we'll only support those who are going to make the renewable and accessible option the affordable option. And so, it's important to really reframe your thinking back to the root of the problem, which is the burning of fossil fuels for energy. And so I appreciate that you brought up the use of electric cars. You know, transportation is a part of our economy that burns fossil fuels, whether it's transporting people from one place to the next, whether it's transporting goods and services from one place to the next. You know, we can vote to make those renewable options more affordable, but we can also support community programs in the places that we live and commute for work that are taking more cars off the road in general.
Fabulous. Thank you, Marisa, for answering that. And if we have no more questions for now, we'll start to wrap up, but be assured we'll still keep an eye out and we can get back to you with any questions that come in later. And of course, you'll have the opportunity to ask us questions all summer long because the Beluga Cam is kicking off live tomorrow, live from Churchill on the Churchill River in Manitoba on the coast of Hudson Bay there. So you'll be able to watch on explore.org or the polarbearsinternational.org website from now until the end of August or September 1st. And you can see the most incredible views of beluga whales and their babies and listen to them sing and chat. And you can also listen to our fabulous captain and all the guests that he'll bring throughout the summer. So that's Captain Kyron McIver will be manning the boat most of the time, and we'll have special researchers, local people, all sorts of really interesting folks on the beluga boat throughout the summer that you can send questions to anytime. So we'll be posting the tide schedule on the explore.org website so you know when to tune in. But definitely, if you can, tune in tomorrow at 7:30 p.m. Central Time. So that'll be 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. For our official kickoff of the boat on the river. So we're hoping the weather cooperates. It's been a bit rough out there, apparently. So let's keep our fingers crossed to see some beluga whales. Belugas depend on Arctic sea ice, polar bears depend on Arctic sea ice, and all of us, no matter where we live around the world, benefit from the presence of Arctic sea ice. So thank you again for joining us today to learn more about how to get involved and how to talk about it. And thank you also to our partners at the Annenberg Foundation, explore.org, and Frontiers North Adventures for helping us make all of this happen. We really appreciate it. Thanks to my colleagues today, both Marisa and Kayla with the amazing role play, and KT and Albert and Ray in the background making this whole production work. It's been a lift, but they did a fabulous job. And thanks again to you. And please do continue to learn more, talk to your civic leaders, vote if you can, if you're old enough, and just have conversations through the summer and keep in touch with us anytime. We're here to help. Thank you again to everyone. Happy Arctic Sea Ice Day tomorrow, and hopefully we'll see you on the Beluga Camp sometime.